For a time, those infected with AIDS were feared by the world. In public, they were glittering stars. But behind the glamour, they were individuals who lived in fear, hiding their illness and racing against death. Some were movie legends hosting wild gay parties on a massive scale. Some cursed the LGBTQ+ community only for fate to ironically bring them down with AIDS. Even more horrifying, some chose death under the spotlight in front of millions of viewers. The 20 names on this list are icons, from actors, singers, and politicians to Broadway legends. They made the world mourn their passing, and it was even more heartbreaking when they died from a disease the world once rejected. 1. Rock Hudson. His death changed America's perspective on AIDS. Rock Hudson, a name that evokes the image of a true silver screen idol. He embodied the male symbol that America adored in the 50s. But few knew his glamorous life was a perfectly staged drama. With his striking good looks, Hudson quickly became an A-list star. But behind the spotlight, he lived in intense fear. He was gay. In an era when a single rumor could end a career, Hudson was forced to hide his true self. He lived two parallel lives. One was the passionate lover on screen, and the other was himself behind the gates of his Beverly Hills mansion, where secret wild parties took place all under the radar of the media. His mansion, located at 9402 Beverly Crest Drive, was where these all-night parties occurred, filled with drugs and illicit activities. Rumor had it that guests were forced to remain silent, and no paparazzi dared to intrude, as those who tried would mysteriously disappear. Rumors began to spread. To silence any doubts, in 1955, his agent, Henry Wilson, arranged a fake marriage with his assistant, Phyllis Gates. In 1984, the real tragedy struck when he was diagnosed with AIDS, a disease that was seen as a death sentence for gay men at the time. By July 1985, when he appeared pale and emaciated, the story finally leaked. On July 25th, 1985, Hudson's agent officially confirmed the shocking news: he had AIDS. His death at the age of 59 not only marked the end of a tragic life, but also sent shockwaves worldwide. It forced Hollywood to expose its falseness and marked a turning point in how the world viewed AIDS. But Hudson was just a prominent example of an AIDS death. Another famous actor, despite using extreme measures to cure his homosexuality, still succumbed to the disease. 2. Anthony Perkins, the killer who never lived his true life. The world knows Anthony Perkins as the most iconic killer in cinematic history, Norman Bates from Psycho. But what few know is that this role haunted Perkins so much that it almost mirrored his own life, a man living behind a perfect mask. Born with artistic blood, Anthony was destined to be a star. An Oscar nomination for his second film, heartthrob roles that women adored, and even a hit on the Billboard charts. Off-screen, Anthony was gay, but he wasn't allowed to admit it. In the 1950s, he and his boyfriend, actor Tab Hunter, had to live in fear. Photos from that era even captured staged fake dates. The two men would sit side by side at a movie theater, holding hands with temporary girlfriends, a collective performance to hide their love. But his entire life was overshadowed by the obsession to be masculine. He delved into conversion therapy, torturous methods to cure himself of being attracted to men, and even married photographer Barry Berenson. In the late 1980s, death came knocking again. The heartbreaking part was that he learned he was HIV positive, not from a doctor, but from a tabloid newspaper. Keeping the truth from his family, he continued to act. Though his body was visibly wasting away, he still managed to wear a smile. On September 12, 1992, Anthony Perkins passed away at age 60 from AIDS-related pneumonia. But his family's tragedy didn't end there. Exactly 9 years later, his wife was on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in the horrific terrorist attack, ending everything in tragedy. The tragedy didn't stop there. Another music star died just one day after revealing his illness to the world. 3. Freddie Mercury, the music star who died in silence. Freddie Mercury was a living phenomenon in the music world. But behind the legendary mustache and the stage acrobatics, he was a man slowly dying of AIDS. Born Farrokh Bulsara. Freddie always yearned to be himself, but had to hide his true identity. He publicly dated Mary Austin, the woman he called the love of my life, but was actually his soulmate, and then plunged into gay relationships and all-night parties. The pain of this period became the raw material for his timeless songs. In 1987, Freddie received the devastating news he was HIV positive. Despite the disease destroying his womb every day, he continued to work tirelessly. The song, "The Show Must Go On," was born during this time, not just a song, but a powerful declaration from a man fighting his fate. On November 23, 1991, after years of secrecy, Freddie announced to the world that he had AIDS, and just 24 hours later, he passed away. Mary Austin inherited the majority of Freddie's estate after his death in 1991, including the famous Garden Lodge home. Freddie's death was not the end. He turned it into a final performance, a powerful reminder of the disease of the century. After his passing, the Mercury Phoenix Trust was founded to continue the fight against AIDS, transforming loss and pain into meaningful action, leaving an immortal legacy for all of humanity. Freddie Mercury's death was not the end. There's another story about a man who had to maintain a perfect image his entire life only for the painful secrets behind it to be known only to his closest loved ones. 4. Robert Reed, the secret behind the perfect on-screen father to millions of American viewers. Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch was the model of an ideal father. But for Robert Reed, the man behind the role, it was just a perfect facade for a life full of secrets and constant fear. Born in 1932, as John Robert Wrights Jr., Reed began his career in theater before quickly becoming America's dad. However, even as the country revered him as the ideal man, Reed was living a secret battle. After a 5-year marriage, he confessed to his wife that he was gay. On set, he was known for being an extreme perfectionist, often clashing with writers over scripts he felt lacked depth. To the child actors, he truly became a father. taking them to the theater and encouraging them to broaden their horizons. He took care of everyone, but no one knew his body was slowly deteriorating. In 1991, bad news struck. He had advanced colon cancer. But when his medical records were released, a more horrifying truth was exposed. Robert Reed was HIV positive. The disease had been silently ravaging his health for years, all while he smiled on screen. On May 12, 1992, he passed away at age 59. Although his death certificate listed the cause as cancer, those close to him understood that HIV/AIDS had led to his premature death. Robert Reed took his secrets to the grave. But it didn't end there. Another death unfolded right before the eyes of millions, leaving a shocking legacy and unanswered questions.
Pedro Zamora. Death televised live to America.
Pedro Zamora was more than a reality TV star. He was the first person who dared to turn his own dying into a lesson for the entire United States by dying in front of millions of viewers. At 17, he was diagnosed as HIV positive. It was 1989 when AIDS was still considered a death sentence and fear consumed society. He could have remained silent, but Pedro chose a different path to fight publicly. He became an HIV warrior, appearing at schools and medical conferences to confront the stigma directly. He used his own body, which was being ravaged by the virus, with the trembling but resilient voice of a man counting down his own time. In 1994, the real-world San Francisco came calling, and Pedro Zamora joined the show. But it was no longer just an entertainment show. It became the diary of a young man dying of AIDS, broadcast to millions of viewers. Zamora took the story of an HIV-positive immigrant and threw it right into the living rooms of middle-class America. He kissed his boyfriend on television. He got engaged. He talked about safe sex, about loneliness, about death, and about the truth. Pedro Zamora transformed America's most feared disease into a real person. His engagement ceremony with his boyfriend, Shawn Sasser, was a historic moment on television. It was the first time a same-sex commitment ceremony was widely broadcast. But by then, Zamora's body could no longer hold on. The disease attacked his brain, leaving him unable to walk, read, or even remember the names of his friends. And then, on November 11th, 1994, just hours after the final episode of The Real World aired, Pedro Zamora took his last breath at the age of 22. His entire life, love struggle, and death had been shown on American television. Pedro Zamora's passing in front of millions of viewers opened up another story this time about a powerful man with secrets he dared not reveal. 6. Ed Koch, New York's Iron Mayor and the Secret No One Dared to Speak. With his famous greeting, "How am I doing?" Ed Koch became a symbol of New York for more than a decade. But behind the smile on his campaign posters was a secret that the public only began to learn about after his death. Born in 1924, Koch was a soldier before becoming mayor of New York in 1977. At the time, the city was struggling with a depleted budget and a crime surge. Koch quickly became a savior, pulling New York back from the brink of bankruptcy. But then a new enemy appeared: AIDS. The epidemic spread quickly, claiming thousands of lives, especially within the gay community. And this is when Koch's golden image began to crack. Activists spoke fiercely. Larry Kramer accused him of a slow response and of standing by and watching gay men die. The criticism was fueled by long-standing rumors that Ed Koch was gay. Koch always remained silent, saying only, "My private life is my private business." To many, that silence was a fear of being exposed, proof of a generation of politicians who chose to live in the closet to preserve their power. It wasn't until after his death in 2013 that his close friend Charles Kaiser confirmed that Koch was gay. Despite signing an order to prohibit discrimination against gay people, many believed that in the fight against AIDS, Koch did too little, too late. On February 1st, 2013, he passed away at age 88, taking to his grave the stonkritz that the city had speculated about for decades. To New York, Ed Koch was both the hero who revived the city and a controversial symbol of silence during the AIDS storm. While Ed Koch took his unrevealed private secrets with him, another political figure in America had to live a more complex and cruel life. 7. Roy Cohn, the most ruthless player in American politics. Roy Cohn still sends shivers down many people's spines, even nearly 4 decades after his death. Born in 1927, he rose to power very early and quickly became one of the most ruthless players in American politics. At 23, Roy Cohn became an advisor to Senator Joseph McCarthy and played a key role in the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. During the Red Scare era, Cohn was also part of the Lavender Scare, a parallel campaign to purge LGBTQ+ people from government. The irony was that throughout his life, Cohn was surrounded by rumors about his true sexuality. His close relationship with his assistant, David Shine, became a media sensation. However, Cohn always denied the rumors and publicly criticized and mocked those who were weak for being true to themselves. After leaving Washington, Cohn didn't disappear, but reinvented himself as a shadowy lawyer, representing big names like Donald Trump and mafia bosses. In 1984, fate turned. Cohn was diagnosed with HA, but he chose to deny it to the very end. To the press, he claimed he had liver cancer. Even as his body wasted away, he maintained the facade of an invincible warrior, never admitting the truth. On August 2, 1986, Roy Cohn died at age 59, leaving a cruel paradox. The man who helped persecute gay people died from the very disease associated with that community. Roy Cohn was not the only case. Another man created a private world of debauchery that would ultimately cause his irreversible downfall. 8. Steve Rubel, New York's King of Darkness and the downfall caused by the very light he created. If there was ever a place in American history where drugs, sex power, and fame mixed like a chaotic electrical storm, it was Studio 54, and the man behind it was none other than Steve Rubel. Born into a modest family in Brooklyn, no one could have guessed that a finance student would soon become a symbol of debauchery. After a series of ordinary jobs, Rubel and his friend Ian Schrager turned an old warehouse into Studio 54, a paradise of chaos filled with vices and drugs. Steve Rubel was the lord of that world. He controlled it with a casting policy for guests. The doors of Studio 54 were never opened to those who weren't attractive enough, and were a decadent heaven for those he chose. Every night was a performance wilder than imagination. Andy Warhol snorting cocaine in the bathroom, Liza Minnelli kissing a stranger on the dance floor, and Mick Jagger dancing naked in sunglasses. But every party has to end. In December 1978, the IRS raided Studio 54 and found over $2 million in cash hidden in the ceiling and safes. Rubel was charged with tax evasion fraud and money laundering. In court, his once arrogant quote, "We make more money than the mafia," became evidence against him. Sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, Rubel was separated from his empire. After his release, he tried to clean up his past by opening Morgan's Hotel, which started the boutique hotel trend. In 1985, Rubel received an invisible sentence. He was HIV positive. On July 25, 1989, just 4 years after his diagnosis, Rubel died in a New York hospital. The official cause of death was announced as hepatitis and septic shock. But everyone understood it was just a name chosen to avoid saying a word that was still stigmatized at the time: AIDS. The deaths from AIDS didn't stop there. Another legend, once brilliant under the stage lights, also quickly faded into oblivion because of this disease of the century. 9. Joel Crawthers, the TV. Prince forgotten by the world. Joel Crawthers was a familiar face on American small screens. With his handsome looks and acting talent, he became an ideal image for millions of viewers through popular TV series like Dark Shadows and Somerset. However, behind the spotlight, Crawthers lived a completely different life. While the public saw him as a masculine icon to his friends and family, he was an openly gay man. At the time, revealing one's sexuality could destroy a career, so he had to hide his true self. Even his engagement to actress Vala Gray was just a staged play to protect his public image. In the early 1980s, as the AIDS epidemic began to spread, Joel Crawthers suddenly disappeared from the screen. By 1985, a heartbreaking truth was revealed: he had died at age 44 from complications of AIDS. Crawthers' death was not widely announced or mourned like other stars. Due to the stigma against AIDS at the time, his career and his true self were almost erased from the public's memory. He passed away in silence, but his story is a painful testament to the prejudices that public figures had to face. But Joel Crawthers was not the only case. Another star who had just begun to shine with talent and charm was also quickly swallowed by death. 10. Wade. Dominguez, the star who just sparkled, was swallowed by the darkness. Wade Dominguez may not be a very famous name, but anyone who has seen the movie Dangerous Minds would find it hard to forget him. Rising as a promising star, Wade's life and career ended tragically and too soon. Born in 1966, with a sharp and wild look, Wade Dominguez quickly made his mark with roles in City of Industry and The T-Man. Everyone saw him as a talented and energetic actor. However, as his career was at its peak, Wade had to face a harsh truth: he was diagnosed with AIDS. In a society still full of prejudice, he chose to remain silent about his illness. Behind the smiles on the red carpet, his body grew weaker. In his final days, Wade's close friend actress, Elizabeth Berkley, brought a rough cut of his last film, The Taxman, for him to watch at the hospital. After watching it, Wade cried and choked out, "I acted so well. I acted so well." On August 26, 1998, Wade Dominguez passed away at age 32 from complications of AIDS. A promising talent was gone forever, leaving great regret for Hollywood cinema. Wade Dominguez was not the only star with a tragic life. Another person, though never appearing on screen, was the one who created trends for an entire generation. 11. Willie Smith, the father of streetwear and a death hidden in the shadows. Willie Smith was not just a designer. He was a man who changed the perception of fashion. He believed that beautiful clothes weren't just for the rich, but for everyone. Born in Philadelphia in 1948, Smith grew up surrounded by the vibrant colors of street culture and music. In 1976, he founded his own brand, Willie Wear, with a simple philosophy to create stylish but affordable clothing. Smith combined the energy of streetwear with the elegance of high fashion, creating designs that were comfortable enough for casual outings, yet suitable for work. Thanks to this, he blurred the lines between high-end and mainstream, making fashion more accessible to everyone. However, his life ended tragically. In 1986, his partner passed away from AIDS-related cancer. Just a few months later, Willie Smith was also hospitalized with symptoms of the disease. On April 17, 1987, he died at age 39. At the time, his company kept the cause of death a secret to avoid social stigma. Nevertheless, Willie Smith's legacy lives on. He proved that fashion is for everyone, and this very idea made him a legend. It didn't stop there. There was another man with a brilliant career filled with impressive supporting roles, who died in an unexpected way. 12. Denholm Elliot, the gentleman of supporting roles and a secret, taken to the grave. Denholm Elliot was the kind of actor whose name you might not remember, but whose face you definitely couldn't forget. He appeared in over 125 films, always on the edge of the frame, yet he captured everyone's attention. Born in London in 1922, Elliot survived 3 years as a prisoner of war. That experience forged him into a strong and instinctive man, qualities that would later help him immensely in his acting. After the war, Elliot became one of England's most beloved supporting actors. He played the bumbling Marcus Brody in Indiana Jones, the wise Coleman in Trading Places, and the warm Mr. Emerson in A Room with a View. However, behind his illustrious career, he had to hide a secret: he was bisexual. In 1987, at the peak of his career, he was diagnosed with AM. At 65, instead of retiring, he continued to work, appearing in many major projects, despite the disease ravaging his body. On October 6, 1992, at age 70, Denholm Elliot passed away at his home from complications of AIDS. The news shocked the British film industry, not just for the loss of a great talent, but because it was the first time many people learned about the illness he had been forced to hide. In his memory, the BAFTA Denholm Elliot Award was established for promising actors a way for his legacy to live on. He lived a life much like the characters he played, sometimes clumsy, sometimes profound, but always containing more than met the eye. And as Denholm Elliot took his secrets to the grave, another person prominent in a great sport also had a tragic death. 13. Andrei Nepa, the death of the great ice prince. Andrei Nepa's story began not with passion, but on a doctor's recommendation. In 1951, 7-year-old Nepa was taken by his mother to the ice rink to treat his asthma. No one could have guessed that this step would lead him to become one of the greatest figure skating legends of the century. Nepa quickly showed a natural talent. At just 13, he represented Czechoslovakia at the 1964 Winter Olympics. Although he didn't win a medal, his grace and precision in every glide heralded the arrival of an ice prince. His peak came in Sapporo, 1972, an Olympic gold medal along with 3 world championships and 5 European titles. On the ice, he was the embodiment of elegance and absolute discipline. In his private life, he was quiet and reserved, so much so that even those in the industry rarely knew about his personal affairs. Still, rumors circulated in the skating community about his relationships with male skating partners. After retiring, he continued to work as a coach. But by 1988, his health suddenly deteriorated. He was diagnosed with lymphoma, an illness that many in the industry believed was related to AIDS. On February 2, 1989, Andrei Nepa died in Mannheim, Germany, at age 38. He took to his grave not only his shimmering gold medals, but also the secrets that the world would likely never fully know. And as Andrei Nepa passed away, with his sparkling gold medals, many other film stars also had to face death in silence.
The spotlight on a quiet death in secret.
Hollywood was once captivated by Brad Davis's charming smile and burning eyes. But behind the face that made millions of hearts flutter was a dark story so profound that he had to take it to his grave. Born into an unhappy family, Davis overcame hardship to move to New York to pursue his acting dreams. In 1978, his role as Billy Hayes in the film Midnight Express made him an overnight star, earning him a prestigious Golden Globe Award. Later, he made a strong impression with his role in Querelle, becoming a gay icon, even though he was married with a child in real life. But Brad Davis wasn't just acting on screen. In his private life, he was also playing the role of a perfect man, hiding his inner cracks. He plunged into drugs and alcohol as a way to forget his fame and his true self. Then tragedy struck. In 1985, Davis was diagnosed with AIDS. At the time, AIDS was a death sentence accompanied by horrific stigma. He kept the truth a secret, only telling a few of his closest loved ones. For 6 years, Davis continued to act while silently fighting the disease as his body gradually wasted away. When he felt he was about to lose everything, Davis made a decision that left Hollywood stunned. On September 8, 1991, at age 41, he ended his own life through assisted suicide, choosing to pass away before the disease could rob him of his entire body and dignity. Only after his death did his wife announce the truth. The book she wrote laid bare the image of a star who once conquered the world but had to live and die in such pain. And as Brad Davis passed away in silence, another legend, while living in the spotlight, couldn't hide his own deceptions. 15. Liberace glamour, deceit, and a hidden death. Behind the dazzling performances, Liberace's life was a tragic melody, where the glamour was only a cover for his lies. From a poor immigrant boy, he transformed his natural talent into a unique brand. He didn't just play the piano, he performed a personality. With rhinestone-studded capes, a slick hairstyle, and a candelabra-adorned piano, he became Mr. Showmanship. But the more he shone, the more he went to extreme length to hide his sexuality. For decades, Liberace vehemently denied all rumors about his sexual orientation. When the Daily Mirror implied he was gay, he sued and swore on the Bible, "I am not a homosexual and have never had homosexual relations." Backstage, Liberace lived like a hidden emperor. He had a 5-year relationship with Scott Thorson, a chauffeur, but the affair ended in endless chaos. In 1980, Thorson sued him for a massive amount of money, revealing shocking details like how he pressured Thorson to have plastic surgery to look like him when he was younger. In the mid-1980s, as the AIDS epidemic raged, Liberace's health visibly declined. He became thin, emaciated, and had to wear an unusually thick layer of makeup. On February the 4th, 1987, just 3 months after his last performance, Liberace passed away. Initially, the cause was announced as heart failure and encephalitis with no mention of AIDS. But the medical examiner revealed the shocking truth. Liberace died of pneumonia as a complication of AIDS. As Liberace's death revealed the painful truth, another genius who brought forth masterpieces had to die in secret, hidden by a famous animation studio. 16. Howard Ashman, the lyricist genius hidden in the shadows by Disney. He was called the man who gave the mermaid her voice, and the one who gave the beast a soul. However few know that the man behind those timeless songs wrote his legacy while battling AIDS. Born in 1950, Howard Ashman quickly showed his talent for the stage. With composer Alan Menken, he created the massive success of the musical Little Shop of Horrors. By 1986, when Disney gave him the script for the animated film The Little Mermaid, he wrote classic songs like Under the Sea and Part of Your World, contributing to the film's spectacular success and kicking off the Disney Renaissance. However, at the peak of his career, Howard Ashman received devastating news. He was diagnosed with HIV. At that time, the disease was still heavily stigmatized, and if the truth were revealed, he would lose everything. Therefore, he decided to keep this secret. In his final months, he worked from his hospital bed. His close friend, Alan Menken, brought a piano into his room so they could compose together. The song, The Mob Song, from Beauty and the Beast, which he wrote the lyrics for, is about a fearful and hateful mob chasing the beast. It took on a profound meaning, reflecting the fear that people with AIDS had to face. On March 14, 1991, Howard Ashman passed away. At the end of Beauty and the Beast, Disney included a small, meaningful tribute to our friend Howard, who gave a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul. We are forever grateful. When Howard Ashman died, people also remembered another artistic legend who had fought his past and yearned for freedom. 17. Rudolph Nurv, the dancer who defected from Russia and his final fall from AIDS. At Le Bourget Airport in Paris on June 17, 1961, a young Soviet dancer named Rudolph Nurv stood before a decision that would change history. Surrounded by KGB agents, he had to choose between returning to Moscow or defecting to the West. In that moment, he made a daring choice. He leaped over the security barrier seeking freedom and abandoning everything he had in his homeland. After successfully escaping KGB control, Rudolph Nurv entered the Western world. There, together with the legendary ballerina Dame Margot Fonteyn, he created unforgettable performances that left audiences breathless, with productions like Romeo and Juliet and Swan Lake. He breathed new life into classical ballet, blurring gender boundaries in his roles and bringing male dancers to the center of the stage. Off stage, Nurv lived the life of an exile, indulging in lavish parties and affairs with powerful people. In the late 1980s, rumors spread Nurv had AIDS. On January 6, 1993, Rudolph Nurv passed away at age 54. To honor him, the Opéra de Paris hung a giant black curtain. Many believed that Nurv's death was not an end, but a final leap out of this world, just as he had leaped out of the Soviet Union 3 decades earlier. When Rudolph Nurv died of AIDS, people also remembered another star who, once brilliant on stage, also faded into oblivion as death approached. 18. Paul Shenar, the death of a stage genius. Forgotten by the world, Paul Shenar may not be a household name to the general public, but to those who love the theater, he was a legend. He later moved to film and made a strong impression with his role as the drug lord Alejandro Sosa in the 1983 film Scarface. The portrayal of that cold, ruthless, yet captivating man was not just acting. It was the true nature of Paul Shenar, a man who was all too familiar with living a double life. In his personal life, Paul Shenar was gay. In the 70s and 80s of Hollywood, this was a secret that could not be revealed. He was forced to live in silence to protect his career in a disciplined solitude. It was rumored that he had a 5-year relationship with actor Jeremy Brett, and that the two lived and loved each other in secret. At the peak of his career, Paul Shenar was diagnosed with HIV. He continued to work and appear on stage, but his body slowly wasted away. No one knew what pain he endured, and no one dared to ask. Then one day, he suddenly disappeared. On October 11, 1918, Paul Shenar died at the age of 53 from complications of AIDS. Paul Shenar did not die from the disease itself, but from the silence and stigma of an industry that forced him to hide until there was no longer a chance to be seen. Paul Shenar was not the only tragic case. There was an artist who, despite creating images full of emotion, passed away just as the world began to understand his messages. 19. Keith Haring, the man who drew crying figures and died, just as the world began to understand him. Keith Haring was more than just an artist. He was seen as a burning heart among the concrete walls of a New York City decaying from indifference and stigma. Born in Pennsylvania in 1958, Keith grew up with colorful drawings. When he moved to New York, he drew vibrant images on subway walls and abandoned walls places where the poor, gay, and people of color lived. He used white chalk to draw on billboards, turning every subway train into a mobile gallery, bringing art to people who would never step foot in a museum. When the world started to pay attention, Keith didn't back down. He used his drawings to attack social issues, racial discrimination, gender stigma, and especially the deadly silence surrounding the AIDS epidemic. In 1987, Keith tested positive for HIV. His drawings began to crack, become hollow, and overlap like corpses. His artworks became agonizing fierce and filled with red, the color of warning. Instead of collapsing, Keith founded the Keith Haring Foundation to support people living with HIV/AIDS. While the U.S. government was still indifferent, he bravely stepped onto the front lines, using his own deteriorating body to spread his message. On February 16, 1990, Keith Haring died at the age of 31. He passed away too young, but his artworks live on, dancing on hospital walls, in schools, and in the memories of those who saw them. Keith Haring's death was a great loss to the world. But there was another actor, though not widely known, who had the courage to publicly reveal his disease of the century. 20. Steven Stucker, the first actor to publicly announce he had AIDS. Steven Stucker. The name that could make an entire movie theater erupt in laughter with just a glance carried a heartbreaking and chilling life story. Born in 1947 in Des Moines, Iowa, Stucker showed a natural gift for comedy early on. He didn't just act, he burned up the screen with passionate energy and a quirky, improvisational style in the Airplane series, turning every scene he appeared in into a moment the audience couldn't look away from. But behind the laughter was a dark secret. In 1984, at the peak of his career, Stucker received an invisible death sentence. He was HIV positive. At the time, AIDS was feared, associated with stigma and inevitable death. Instead of staying silent to protect his reputation, Stucker chose to confront it, directly becoming one of the first actors to publicly announce he had AIDS. He brought his familiar comedic face into the light as a challenge to the disease that society was shunning. In interviews, Stucker did not shy away from his past struggles with addiction, admitting that drugs might have been the cause of his infection. But time was not on his side. Just 2 years later, in 1986, at the age of 38, Steven Stucker passed away, leaving a void in the world of comedy that was difficult to fill, and a legacy of rare courage in Hollywood history. Cool. Have you ever wondered what lies behind all that dazzling fame? If you were at a crossroads between living true to yourself or putting on a mask for the sake of fame, which path would you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to hit subscribe and turn on notifications for the next stories.